My name's Howard Knox, Airport Manager, Bankstown Airport, and Chairman of the Bankstown Aviation Museum Incorporated. I would like to welcome Prime Minister, the Honourable Paul Keating, local state members of Parliament, Doug Shedden and Pat Rogan, Councillor Phil Lopez, Mayor of Bankstown, Bankstown City Councillors, the Bankstown Committee, Frank Conroy, Chairman of the FAC, the Bankstown Historical Society, relatives of Sir Charles Kingsford Smith, relatives of P.G. Taylor, our World War II aviators, the Australian Women Pilots Association, the Royal Flying Doctor Service, the RAAF and Royal Australian Navy, Australian Whalebirds Association, the New South Wales Police, colleagues from the various aviation museums, the Australian Aviation Club, Bankstown Airport personnel, past and present, students of the University of New South Wales School of Architecture, colleagues of the Bankstown City Council, the Civil Aviation Authority, the FAC, and distinguished guests. Welcome to Bankstown Airport and thank you for coming. Today we will witness the start of a dream that will become a reality because of the will and the determination of many of you who are here today. You may be wondering why we are surrounded by so many flags. This actually represents the history of Bankstown Airport. The Australian, the New South Wales State and Bankstown City Council flags covers where we are. During World War II, the airport was an RAAF base, a United States Army Air Corps base, the forerunner of the United States Air Force, and a Royal Naval ship, yes, a ship, Her Majesty's ship Nabley. From 1948 to 87, the airport was under the administration of the Department of Civil Aviation, hence the Civil Air Ensign. And since 1988, the FAC flag has flown at the airport mast. We fly the Sydney Olympic 2000 flag because we are proud and delighted that this great event will be staged in Sydney in the year 2000. At the conclusion of the formalities and following the turning of the first sod of this project by our Prime Minister, the Mayor of Bankstown will raise the Bankstown Aviation own flag. I'm pleased to inform you of several matters that have a great impact on this project's success. The first is that Dick Smith, who is well known to you all, has accepted the invitation to be patron of the museum. And yesterday we received advice that the body has been incorporated. The main benefit of this is that all donations will be tax deductible. Sorry about that, Prime Minister. Also to the students and staff of the University of New South Wales School of Architecture who are with us here today. As part of their studies, they will produce 25 design concepts who visit the airport every year from all over the Sydney area. They will gain an understanding and knowledge of the dreams and visions of this great country's aviators of the past and present, such as Kingston Smith, Hawker, Ulm, P.G. Taylor, Hinkler, Hardgraves, Hudson Fish, Reds Ansett and Flint of the Inland, just to mention a few from the past. As for the present, many of you are with us today. I am delighted now to introduce His Worship the Mayor of Bankstown, Phil Lopez. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Howard, my Prime Minister, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be given this opportunity on behalf of the people of Bankstown to welcome so many distinguished guests to this historic occasion. The occasion of the turning of the first sod for the Bankstown Airport Aviation Museum. I want particularly to extend a special welcome to our Prime Minister. And if you've been a proud member of the Bankstown community for 50 years, as I have, then you will take some great pride in the fact that Bankstown has been able to produce a Prime Minister. And whilst the Prime Minister and I have known each other for almost all of our lives, this is the very first opportunity that I have had in my capacity as Mayor of this great city to welcome the Prime Minister back to Bankstown. And if you'll allow me the opportunity to reminisce, I might, and anyway I've got the microphone so I will, but I recall, Prime Minister, that 25 years ago in a restaurant at Bankstown Square called the Bird and the Bottle, it probably didn't survive that luncheon engagement of yours and mine because it wasn't there for much longer after that. But it was there that you told me 25 years ago that you would be one day Prime Minister of Australia. And Paul, at that stage, did unfold a scenario of events, and for the most part, they have. That's the way it's happened, and I guess that gives you some indication of the guile and fortitude that Paul tackles his task as Prime Minister. At that particular time, Paul and I both shared the love of our community, and I guess it has to be said that Paul made just a wee bit more progress than I did. Although when he made off to Canberra, he did leave me to have to deal with Kevin McCormack. The creation of this airport museum is probably one of the most exciting things that have happened in recent times. And I certainly don't want to dwell on the project because there are others who are far more competent than I to do that. But I do want to say the project is just another example of the tremendous community spirit that exists here in Bankstown. What we have here today is a whole lot of groups joining together to make this dream, a dream that Howard referred to earlier, a reality. We've got the Federal Airports Corporation joining with the Bankstown Council, the Historical Society, the University and so many other groups who will make this the success that I believe it's going to be. For obvious reasons, airports, no matter where they are, have the potential to cause community concerns. But I'm pleased to report that this Bankstown Airport doesn't create those concerns, and this is in no small measure due to the management of Howard Knox and his team, for the ability that they have to communicate on a regular basis with the community at large, and we certainly thank them for that. Of course, Howard Knox's influence around this town just doesn't come within the perimeter of this airport. Wherever good things are being done in this city, you'll find Howard Knox. Finally, on behalf of my council, I want to thank all of those who have contributed to this project. I want to thank all of you who've come to share this ceremony with us. And now I have great pleasure in inviting the Honourable Paul Keating, the Prime Minister of Australia, to speak with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Phil Lopez, Mayor of Bankstown, Howard Knox, Frank Conroy, the Chairman of the FAC, my parliamentary colleagues and friends of long standing, Doug Shedden and Pat Rogan, distinguished members of Bankstown Council and of the Bankstown community, and those who are committed to this project, distinguished guests one and all. Well, it is a great pleasure for me to be involved with this project and an honour to be asked to be part of it and to be here to turn the first sod. I mean, I've turned many sods in public life, turned over many sods in public life, and this will just be another one. But this is one of an unambiguous pleasure, where some of the others, the pleasure has been somewhat questionable. And I'm very pleased today that Dick Smith's also agreed to be patron of this organisation as somebody who has a commitment to aviation and a distinguished connection with aviation in Australia. This is a feather in the cap of the museum. I'm particularly pleased that Bankstown is still playing to its strengths, and Bankstown Airport has always been part of the culture of the city of Bankstown, as indeed as other natural parts of the area, as the river. But because we've been connected with aviation for so long, there's something natural about an aviation museum coming here, particularly as this area was a wartime airfield, and later, of course, during the war, a manufacturing centre for Hawker de Havilland, and later, of course, as the most important of the general aviation airfields in this part of Australia, and as a manufacturing centre with Hawker Pacific. We've kept all of those linkages through the years, and with flying training, most people who learn to fly in the Sydney area learn to fly from here, with the Royal Aero Club, and with the, if you like, smaller time aviation companies, smaller businesses which have always been part and parcel of the Bankstown scene. And this has been over the years, of course, in part with historic aircraft. And we've seen here a number of people operate historic aircraft here over the years. There's one taking off right now, as you can hear it. And with these historic aircraft, we've had flying training, and we've had flying schools and joy flights and all the things which an airport like this, a historic airport, attracts. And I think today it is a tribute to the city, to the Federal Airports Corporation, to the Australian Warbirds Association, to the Powerhouse Museum and Hawker de Havilland to get together and to establish a museum here of historic aircraft and to make it a centre of cultural tourism. Because I think it's important that Australians preserve and recognise their culture, and important here in Bankstown that cultural tourism is something which the Bankstown community regard as important to them. And a centrepiece of this will be, of course, the role of Sir Charles Kingsford Smith in Australian aviation. And I suppose no name in Australian aviation so typifies the endurance and perseverance and vision for aviation in this country than Sir Charles Kingsford Smith. Somebody who served at Gallipoli, served in France in the First World War, was distinguished in his service, and who returned to Australia and then operated aviation businesses from time to time during the periods which he flew these epic flights from the United States to Australia, from Britain to Australia, from Australia to New Zealand, across the continent of Australia, demonstrating that aviation could serve Australia not just simply in mail deliveries, as then was the important thing, but in the carriage of people and in the establishment of regular public transport in aviation. And he became not just famous in this country, but famous all over the world. And his flight from France to the United States saw him with a bumper reception in New York of the kind he received at Mascot here in Australia when he flew the Southern Cross here in the 1920s. So this is a person who took a great interest in the region, and I suppose if these days, with Australia's interest in the Asia-Pacific and our linkages to the Asia-Pacific, Charles Kingsford Smith was one of the pioneers of those linkages as he sought to establish businesses in which he was involved himself, carrying people and mail between Australia and Southeast Asia. So, in very much a pioneer of Australia's role in the Asia-Pacific and role in the world, and a pioneer in the aviation which has linked Australia not simply to Asia, but to North America and to Europe. And in that sense, he was distinguished not simply in Australia, but around the world. So a museum which is in large part established around his memory is another fitting tribute to this great pioneer, a world pioneer of aviation. And while I suppose we can't coax the Southern Cross from Brisbane into this museum, certainly much of the memorabilia and memory of Sir Charles Kingsford Smith is here. Now, the fact that Hawker Pacific is the old Hawker de Havilland company is going to be involved in this is, I think, important. And today, on the airport at Hawker Pacific, we have a contemporary aircraft industry which is making now elements of aircraft for the Boeing company and other companies around the world, so that it's not simply just a general aviation airfield with some historic aircraft, but it's maintained that linkage with commerce as it always has. So in many respects, the character of Bankstown Airport hasn't changed. It's got more sophisticated, but it hasn't changed from the early war years when it used to be a wartime airport. And I can remember Phil spoke warmly of my young years here in Bankstown, but I can remember well decisions we used to take invariably most weekends to ride the bike from Bankstown over Black Charlie's Hill and down to the airport, through the bush, which is now settled, of course, with a housing estate. And in those days, the Beaufort bombers used to be lined up, and all other ex-World War II aircraft in lines just outside of Sid Marshall's old hangar on the other side, and we were regularly shooed off by officials as we moved in and out of each cockpit and gave all the instruments a working out and the rest. I can remember all that, and I can remember some of the characters of the airport, like Sid Marshall, who had the Messerschmitt and the Zero and the Spitfire and all of the other things, and the Lockheed Electra, which we just seen take off. And the place had those sort of characters about it. But people who understood about the antecedents of aircraft and the importance of particular aircraft to the development of the aircraft, passenger aircraft, particularly in fighter aircraft as we know them today. Now, much of that's been preserved in Australia because we are, fortunately as a nation, great bowerbirds. We hang on to most things, and we've got a great collection of historic aircraft, we've got a great collection of historic cars, we've got a great, collection of many other areas of collecting. And it's a good thing to see some of this cultural property wrapped up in a well-managed museum, and that's why I do pay tribute to the Bankstown City Council and those involved in thinking about doing this again. Now, some of it's got away from us. Someone smuggled a Spitfire out on us a few years ago. Well, we shouldn't let these things happen in the future. We ought to hang on to all the historic things we have and be able to build things where our children can come and see what it was like, what were the sort of aircraft that have flown, what was the sort of genre of the epoch, the personalities involved, and some of the history of this great country of ours in aviation. So could I again thank you for asking me to be available to officiate at the turning of the sod and the building of this facility, congratulate all those involved, and particularly on the contribution of the young architects to the building of this museum, because it's important to get that right, I think, the planning of it, and for those who've committed themselves, their name and their organisation so generously to its progress and its success. This is another milestone for Bankstown, and hopefully at the period of the bicentenary we'll be able to have a fully fledged and operating historic aircraft museum here. Congratulations one and all, and it is with much pleasure that I now take the opportunity of turning the first sod on the development of this important and historic piece of cultural property. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister, on behalf of the Federal Airports Corporation, let me say how delighted that we all are that you've been able to find time in your busy schedule to join us here to launch the Charles Kingsford Smith Aviation Museum. We are very delighted and very proud the fact that the museum will be built on this site on Bankstown Airport to commemorate the achievements of the great airman Charles Kingsford Smith. It is most symbolic that the focal point of the museum will be the Kingsford Smith's original hangar that until 1991 sat at Sydney Airport. This hangar was originally built by this great airman at Sydney Airport in the early 1930s as the nucleus of his first commercial operations, and it is the framework of this hangar that will be re-erected on this very site that we are standing today. Prime Minister, may I say that the Corporation is very proud to be associated with this project. We are pleased to make available the land at peppercorn rent and to donate the framework of the historic hangar to the Charles Kingsford Smith Aviation Museum. As explained earlier by Howard Knox, the Bankstown Airport has had a long and colourful career in aviation since its commissioning as an airport in 1941 and played a major role during World War II. And we look forward to a continuing association not only with this museum but as a further commitment to the close relationship that the Corporation and especially Bankstown Airport have with the community and the aviation industry. Again, Prime Minister, thank you very much for taking the time to join us on this occasion.
It's going to be fantastic for the people of Bankstown because it's going to be the only aviation museum in Australia of this type where you've got the aircraft that you can open the hangar doors and get them flying. And there are some magnificent historic aircraft around, and so I think it's going to be very, very popular. You're going to have people not only from all over Sydney travelling here, but from all over the world. I know I'm an aviation enthusiast, and I've gone to the best museums in England, in Canada, in America, and my counterparts in these other countries will end up coming to Bankstown to see the museum here.
I think it's a great thing for Bankstown, and I'm so pleased that so many people who have been associated with Charles Kingsford Smith are here, and that the linkages with his hangar and that whole sense of Australian aviation history is being able to be captured here.
Well, it's going to be tough because it's tough economic times, and so to get the money, I think it's a credit to Howard Knox and the committee here of what they've done. It's going to be very much substantially funded by donations and corporate help, and I think that's very healthy. I think it's the ideal way to do it. It's going to take a while to get it right, but it's going to be a fantastic museum.
If it's well designed, and I believe it will be from the start, and it tells a story, as an historic aircraft flying over right now. And if it tells a story, then I think it means that, you know, my generation's children can see what I was able to see and feel some of the history of Australian aviation.
Well, I think in the beginning, I think it's one of the the finest things that's happened in recent times. It's certainly one of the better developments. I think that it's going to bring tourism to Bankstown, which I think is extremely important. I think it's going to allow us to demonstrate to the community at large not only what will be available in this museum, and I believe that given the level of support that we've had so far, that it's going to be all-embracing, that it's going to allow us to show off our parks along the riverside here and all of that. And I think that Bankstown is really going to gain tremendously from the fact that we're going to have this development here, and I'm very excited about it, very excited.
I'm chairman of the Bankstown Aviation Museum Incorporated. It's a pleasure to be in that role, and the main function is to oversee the development of the museum from its concept through to fruition.
I think it'll be quite huge. The people who've come forward and offered their assistance in whatever way have been absolutely tremendous. I think it's going to get to the stage where they won't be able to accommodate all the pieces that they've been offered.
It always had a sprinkling of historic aircraft, and there was always World War II aircraft here. And in those days it was a manufacturing place, and it still is with Hawke Pacific. In those days we had flying training schools, and we still do. In fact, I learned to fly myself at the Kingston Smith Flying School on a Piper Cub, and there's still flying training. And there was always a sprinkling of historic aircraft. Old Sid Marshall had a Messerschmitt and a Zero and a Spitfire and a couple of Lockheed Electras, and other people had other things. There was a very old 1930s, in very good order, 1930s Beechcraft, which used to belong to Mr. Palmer. And there was always a sprinkling of old warbirds and other historic aircraft. So pulling it together here is really just maintaining the spirit.
I think that it's something that not only Bankstown's going to get the credit for, but I think it's going to be something that's going to be a landmark in the city of Sydney.
The way it's going to develop is that we've asked for a grant from the federal government, and we believe that grant will be tied in with raising funds, and we will seek corporate sponsorship. The first stage is the erection of Kingston Smith's original hangar from Sydney Airport. That's only stage one. The university students of New South Wales School of Architecture are working on a total design concept of what the museum will be like in 5 to 10 years' time. And I see it a very interactive museum where the children who come and visit the place and the visitors will be able to come and see aircraft and the history of Bankstown, because Bankstown Airport is part of the history of the Bankstown city, so we have invited also the Bankstown Historical Society to tell their story and part of the airport story in the museum.
I saved up to learn to fly. It took me 3.5 years to have enough money. I had a precious £200, and Kingsford Smith had come around the country barnstorming, told me he was starting his flying school in August, and on the 11th of August 1933 I came down from the country, and my mother lived in Manly, and rang up Kingsford Smith, went out to Mascot and started my lessons. I guess you were there then too.
1933, yeah.
You had to get the 6 cushions for me to...
Exactly, to build you up.
build me up so I could see over the edge of the cockpit.
What did your mother think of all this?
Well, I don't know, but at least they didn't stop me. And that's I'm forever grateful, because I know lots of people who'd like to have learned to fly in those days, but their parents wouldn't allow them. But I'm one of 6, you see, and it has a distinct advantage being one of 6, you know. They can't control 6 children.
Well, I own a business on the airport here, and Clambach and Hennessy. My partner's Ray Clambach, and the business is basically flying training, charter and international ferry of aircraft. And the smallest aircraft we have for training purposes are Cherokee Warriors, and the biggest aircraft that we have for charter work is the Super King Air.
I started on the 11th of August 1933. I had had a trial instructional flight when I was 15, but I had to be 17 and a half to start my flying. I didn't have enough money until then. And but you started engineering, what, in 1929? 29.
I think it'll be terrific. I mean, it's going to be a record of our wonderful heritage of aviation. I think it'll just be fantastic when it's finished.
Husbanding our cultural property, pulling it together, understanding its importance, asserting its importance, is important to do just by itself. And the cultural tourism which comes with it, people coming to look at these things, is a good thing to be doing too, particularly for Bankstown, which has got so much to sell.
Australian aviation history isn't terribly well known or recognised overseas because they basically all know about what the Americans have done. But in fact, the person you really want to talk to about aviation history is Nancy Bird, because she can absolutely rattle it off, all the things that Australian aviators have done. I'm not so good at that side of it. I'm more a modern aeroplane expert.
Gypsy moth I was flying. There was a wooden gypsy moth, and there's a picture of it there in the tent with Jocelyn Howe, the star of A Squatter's Daughter, who came out to do a publicity flight, and I took her up. She was very brave, wasn't she? And then there was another metal moth, the OZ, that belonged to Kingsford Smith, and then we had OP, which was Tommy's aeroplane. Tommy Peterbridge aeroplane was leased to Kingsford Smith, and that's one he'd actually built himself.
My normal position is General Manager of the City of Bankstown. Today I'm here as a committee man, and actually I'm the Vice Chairman of the Trust, which was incorporated, as you heard this morning. So my role is to support our chairman in what he's got to do.
It's all experience.
One of my great thrills was flying with Smithy. You know, I went up on the Percival Gull with him. He was demonstrating it to somebody, and he said, "Would you like a ride?" So I hopped in, and he did a loop from the Percival Gull. Wonderful. But another thrill was flying with Jim Broadbent, because he did magnificent stall turns and aerobatics. You see, and all that's experience for you, you know.
I started flying in January 1935 when I joined the Air Force.
There was no syllabus in those days, and you just got the maps out of the maps room and asked somebody how you plotted a course. And when I wanted to learn engineering, oh, you boys did teach me terribly when I wanted to learn engineering. You tell what you did.
Well, we used to give all the dirtiest jobs, cleaning the carbon and oil and pushing things through.
So some things haven't changed.
But anyhow, it didn't deter us. He persevered and kept on, and I guess it stood you in good stead when you're out in the bush now.
Well, cleaning a few spark plugs, but you know, the greatest thrill was the day Tommy gave me a job grinding in valves.
Oh,
I remember that. I really felt I'd graduated then. What I'd ever do with grinding in valves, I don't know. But, you know, we weren't even allowed to swing a propeller. It wasn't until I had my own aircraft that I ever swung a propeller.
I decided that there was a war coming, and there had to be, because they happened every 25 years or so. And I thought, well, there's only one way to fight a clean war, and that's in the air. So I joined the Air Force. And fortunately, the Air Force agreed with me.
I think the most memorable flying I ever did was taking off after a forced landing about 168 miles northwest of Bourke. And that's memorable because every minute you're expecting the engine to fail. Not what I'd call a great memory.
I'll never forget, it was about the second or third or fourth Vampire that we'd produced in Bankstown, and the aerodrome was wet, and we never knew how a jet handled on a wet aerodrome, but I can always remember that I landed on this occasion on Bankstown Aerodrome in the longest way that I could possibly land, because it was an all-over aerodrome and there was no runways or anything. And I said, well, this is the way I've got to land, and I did everything correctly, and my wireless had failed. And so that was not unusual in those days, and as I jolly well landed, and I was dodging various pools of water, I thought, goodness, there's a tiger moth landing in front of me. And I thought, oh God, he has to see me. He has to see me. But I didn't realise that Sammy Dodd was talking a lovely person whom I now know to be a lovely person named Alex Garrick into a landing, a blind landing, and he never saw me. And I went straight into the middle of him. I must have been doing at least 70 knots. And I thought, well, goodness.
Well, I've had a lot of personal dealings with the airport from the community's point of view. I'd like to see this develop. It will develop, not how I'd like to see it. It will develop, I can tell you. It's got to develop into a major tourist attraction, particularly for the younger people, the school kids. The airport has plans for fast food outlets, service stations all in this area, and I can see in the not too distant future we'll have an up and running museum, and people will be here looking at the museum, watching the aircraft come in and out and using all the outlets on the airport. It will be a major tourist attraction, a big help to the community of Bankstown.
Well, it'll bring back lots of memories of things that happened years ago, which didn't amount to much at the time, but which now are milestones in aviation history.